both the startups, not just in the fintech, but across multiple spaces. And he was the one who was talking about what are the challenges of cross-border activity, and is there something that we can do? And Siddhartha Srivastava, I think I met him a couple of weeks back. Is this working?
Yes.
I met Siddhartha a few weeks back in the context of startups as well. It was with one of the international banks, and most of the time we spent was talking about cross-border issues and what could be addressed. So it seemed like a fantastic opportunity to say, what are some of the issues which a founder or a startup has? What are some of the broader elements which, as an investor, Ravi can kind of provide a perspective, and you can provide what are some of the solutions that are already there, possibly, or maybe your challenges as well on what is there. So it will be kind of a dialogue, and feel free to ask questions. We hope it will be more interactive. Those of you on the who are joining virtually, please make sure that if you have questions, type it in, and one of our folks will look at the questions. I may not be able to do it. Usually, I'm on the on the screen as well, so I'll probably read the questions. But one of you take charge to call out the questions in case we miss it, because I think it would be good for us to make it as interactive as possible. So with that, the seats are yours, and it's very interactive. So hopefully, so Mr. Joshi, you can start off, and then quickly you can introduce yourselves, provide context, and then we can go on from there.
So hi, I'm Siddharth, co-founder, co-CEO of Stockton. We are a cross-border financial services trades company. We're essentially building infrastructure, digital infrastructure, obviously in this day and age, to help people invest, save, remit, anything to do with cross-border. We basically build products and we build a platform which enables Indians, I would say banks, brokers, wealth management firms, fintechs, all kinds of service providers to offer cross-border investing, savings, and remittance solutions to their customers. So you might see us with banks or brokers like HDFC, JM Financial, Motilal, IIFL. If you had accounts with any of these, you can also invest in US stocks. And if you are doing that, or if you come across that kind of product, then you are likely to be in the Stockton channel. Similarly, we are working on a remittance rails product as well, which a lot of fintechs and cooperative banks, etc., can actually utilize to help their customers send money out for their variety of requirements overseas. We're also going to do banking products, and the general idea is that in this day and age, we are fundamentally global, and all our lives are fundamentally borderless, so to say, which basically means our experiences, friends, the content we consume, a lot of our expenses are also not just Indian anymore. But in all of this, our savings and our investments are still extremely localized. There needs to be a way to efficiently globalize your savings, investments, and all your monies. And when we kind of started thinking of Stockton, there was not an easy way of doing this for retail investors or for retail people. So we felt if we build infrastructure, then we'll be able to partner with local banks, brokers, and managers, like I said, and they will be able to offer cross-border infrastructure to their customers. So essentially, that's what we are doing. Okay.
Thank you, and thanks for a very generous introduction, Ms. Sandeep. So happy to be here, and thanks for having me here. I'm Joseph Joshi, and I represent the US regulator in the country, financial sector regulator, called IFSCA, International Financial Services Centers Authority. Whenever we ask, have you heard about GIFT City? People have heard about GIFT City, but they would not have heard about the regulator inside the GIFT City. So I'm the CTO there, and I also head the fintech department, which means responsible for creating the regulations for fintech and also the supervisory models and all the risks associated with it. I also, what do I say, lucky enough to be on some of those India-US fintech regulatory dialogue. India Singapore Joint Working Group on fintech. Recently, we have the integration between two payment systems. We've been on it for quite some time, and also with Japan, we are working on the fintech. So a lot of things happening, and also within the financial sector regulators, we have some groups which go on like IRTG, Interregulatory Technical Group on fintech under DEA and METI, and all the four domestic sector regulators, financial regulators, RBI, SEBI, IIA, us. So all of us are part of those groups. So get to see the perspectives from all the other regulators, and also keep my ears on the ground here from the industry too, because we need to balance the two. And as she rightly said, startup regulator. So we keep moving around, trying to get the few strong bites to see what exactly here. And last time I was here, one of you was surprised to know that India had a regulator who had a regulatory framework for Web 3.0, for blockchain, for metaverse, for quantum already, and we launched this last April 2022. Right, so we'll talk more about those. And also, people are surprised that there was an incentive scheme, grants by the regulator. For the first time in the country, a regulator is giving grants. So we kind of looked at MAS Singapore, and we said that's a good practice to build the ecosystem. And we took the battle hard up to the North Block to get the budget allocated, because we were under Ministry of Finance. But thanks to Madam, the budget was through, and we have some grants too. So we'll talk a lot more about it, question and answers, but let me not bore you. Whatever questions, I'll try my best to answer, but there are some terms where we might not be able to go. So I'll be upfront honest saying, sorry, I won't be able to talk about that. Just to set the context, and most of it, as in every event, views are personal, right? I don't represent IFSCA's official version, even though I am the CTO there. So it's as close as you can get to official, but still the disclaimer has to be there.
Start. Right. Hi, my name is Raghunathan Krishnapat. I'm managing partner with July Ventures, very small fund that we set up 2 years ago. And fintech has been an area for us of not just interest, but also participation. So as Sandhya was saying, we have had this conversation, I think, over a month ago, where we said we have general startup events that talk about funding, fundraising, etc. So we said we have to go in and start talking about some deep dive on a few topics, and cross-border became one of the key things that we work on. Not just from a moment in time perspective. Very, very conscious that India today has not just the ability, but also the chance to lead in establishing some of these norms that we can go and create, right? Not just a standard of some kind. I think we have the ability today to go in, and the opportunity to go and create something that is far ahead. So I'm sure all of you, as he mentioned, I'm sure some of you have looked at what is happening on the payment side with the DCI kind of structure on the infrastructure that is there. So for us, as a VC, we find this digital infrastructure is a very, very fundamental piece that we'd like to be able to. So most of our investment, especially when it comes to tech, has always been on digital infrastructure. So what do I mean by digital infrastructure? Is something that is built for the future, where you are not only looking at it from a purely SaaS licensing perspective, where you are not seeing a pure technology provider and saying, use my portion and I will let you work on it. It's much more fundamental. Because we believe that these structures that are built today will become the basis of commerce as things perform. Right? So whether you're looking at the payment infrastructure, whether you're looking at whether your kind of a structure, crypto infrastructure, if you look at trade finance as an example, we believe that all of this is kind of going to open up the opportunity. So incidentally, Stockholm is one of our investing companies. first few investments. And again, the reason we invested was to make sure that we have the right alignment when it comes to what he calls digital rates, whereas it's digital infrastructure. Okay, so he's talking about transport, for me it's much more fundamental. But happy to take that conversation forward because we think most importantly for the people out here and on the call, I think the next period of time as we speak through, it will be good to go and do a bit of news typing to say what is possible, right? Because I think we are at a cusp of defining what is possible when it comes to cross, right? Not just figuring out to say no, I can't do this. There's a regulatory issue, there are some issues that is going to do, etc. And these, I think it will be a very good opportunity. Happy to take any questions associated with that. Try and answer it, including why did we invest in something if we think under the resources. Thank you. Quick introductory background. I think we have given our background. Maybe we will start with Sitash, your journey as you went to this space, right? Because in some ways, so just to set the background, the first thing that they did was to go back and say that look, everybody should have an investment opportunity. So if you think about the journey that started, I think you should walk us through the journey of why you believe that investment abroad was something that you wanted to encourage to where you are now and how do you see this purpose.
Kind of picking up from that. Right? I think just purely in terms of journey, where we kind of started off was so we obviously looked at the Indian market, and we had a lot of incoming demand, mainly from wealth managers and Indian brokers, saying, "Can I ask my customer to come to Stockholm to open a US investing account?" And at that time, in those days, we were actually building an app for US investors investing in the US markets. So like US retail investors, targeting that, sitting out of Bangalore in HSR. And so a lot of people used to come to us saying, "Hey, if I want to invest in US, can I use your product?" And we'd be like, "No, I mean, you need to have an account with a Charles Schwab or a Fidelity or one of our broking partners in the US. You already need to have an account. And if you do have an account, then sure, you can use our app to get intelligence and ideas, insights." That was kind of the starting point, and more people started asking us that, what if I want to invest in Tesla, or what if I want to invest in Google? Very simple questions in the beginning. There were obviously a lot of people who had ESOPs of some of these companies as well. Like in Bangalore itself, you have Microsoft, you have so many. You probably have over 1 million people or close to 1 million people in India with US listed ESOPs. So a lot of those also sort of used to come to us saying that, "Look, I have this, but I have, in a way, I work for this one company, so I have an ESOP of this. I have ESOPs of this one company. What if I wanted greater exposure? I'm working for Microsoft, but I also want to buy Google shares, for instance, right? And so on and so forth." And for a variety of reasons, the dollar has regularly appreciated against the rupee. So there's obviously a large, there has been a large demand from people who spend money overseas as well, especially planned expenses like education. And RBI fortunately has a very structured scheme for this. It's called the Liberalized Remittance Scheme, LRS. And but not a lot of people know about LRS. And there are very good reports and there is very clean reporting available from RBI on LRS also. And we were looking at LRS data in 2018, and we saw that LRS volumes were just skyrocketing. 2013-14, the LRS volumes were about $1.5 billion or so. And by 2019 or so, they had reached 13 billion. They crossed 13 billion, in fact. And now that's closer to 20 billion. So there's obviously a very secular interest in global expenses or in just general globalization. And we felt that there is no way to make this easy for people. While you can spend very, very easily, saving all your money in rupees and spending a lot of that money in dollars is not very efficient because the dollar appreciates. So we felt that investing is probably the right way of doing it. That if you could find a way to save, invest, and then use that money later on, right, then you're taking less risk with the currency, so to say. So investing became the first product. There there were 2, 3 kinds of demand. People who were saying, I just want these stocks. And we also felt that tomorrow, 5 years down the line, somebody who just starts investing, if all the world is the same, and if the cost of investing within India or outside of India is essentially similar or same, then people will think globally, just like we think in our personal lives. Okay, you want to study in an Indian school, or you want to go to the US or the UK or Australia or Canada for the just like that, if you're investing in a Reliance, then you might want to invest in a Tesla or a Google or an Amazon. But that can only happen if the infrastructure is already there. So people don't need incentive, people just need infra. And we felt that if we could build that infra, then there's probably a few million people will want to use that. In a way, you know that people want to go from point A to point B, but there is no road. So if you do build the road for that, then people will kind of just take to it. In a way, that is what is happening as well. We've seen very good volumes in this kind of space. Like almost touched about 1,800 crores, worth of just investments, over the last 2+ years, and we've seen like almost $1 billion being transacted in this channel that we create. As we were doing this, we kept discovering, regulatory frameworks. LRS was the first of it. There's something that SEBI has to say on this as well. So we went to SEBI as well. So we tried to engage with the regulator, reasonably actively. But it's been mostly, wherever we felt that there's no other way of doing it, and we didn't want to find a workaround. We said we'll work with the regulator. So it's actually, quite great to have you, sir, with us, because if you're listening and if we are engaging, then I think, like Ravi said, there is a way to do some blue sky thinking and say, okay, what all is possible, and what all is, logically allowable in this, right? And then nobody will want to skirt the system. Because obviously skirting the system also kind of happens now. But we take additional responsibility and we say, look, we will go to the regulator, we get this done, and if there are gaps and requests, then we will make them to the regulator. So we started with investing, and as we progress, and I'll get into it as we progress in this conversation as well, we progress to other rails, like I said, other infrastructure for remittance, banking, so on and so forth.
Maybe you want to touch on KYC and AML, these things, I think.
Yes. So more specifically, talking of issues that needed to be addressed. So an Indian person sitting in this room or online, whatever, if you have to invest in a stock in the US, or if you have to open a bank account in the US or Canada or wherever, right, you need the US regulator and the US broker, let's say, to accept your KYC. So that was really the first problem for us. That with an Aadhaar card, with an Indian PAN card, how do we convince a US broker to essentially open a broking account for an Indian person? So that was the first problem that we kind of addressed. We used to know a lot of the brokers. We knew most of the brokers by then because of our past experiences, and we essentially went one by one. So look, if you allow for account opening using an Aadhaar card and using an Indian address proof and so on, and Indian tax ID, there's like 1 million people who will invest, and you will get a lot of assets, you will get a lot of business. Which US market as a whole is kind of saturated. There are many brokers there. Everybody invests. Almost half the country already invests, right? So the growth is not as much as say the Indian market. So essentially, we found ways to work with the regulator there. They said, look, if you are regulated in India and you are doing local KYC validations and so on, and then you work with a US regulated entity which is answerable to FINRA and the SEC. So in India, you have to be answerable to somebody, RBI, SEBI, someone who's stamping your KYC validation. So we thought, okay, let's do that. So we got regulated in India. We said, look, we are doing this. We'll validate KYC because we have the ability to do that in India. And then we will tell you that, look, we have stamped this with our validation. Now you do your own validation, and then you report to the US regulator. So it became a channel. It took us almost 2.5 years to get to a point where they did not require a person to have a passport, etc., like a international ID, so to say, right? And it used to take 4 or 5 days to count for an Indian person, almost a week actually. From that, the amount of time came down to 2 days, and 6 months ago, we brought it down to like 10 minutes. And now we're bringing it down to straight through. So with your Indian eKYC, you can open a US broking account and invest in whatever else you want to do. So that's the journey, but we were able to do that because we actively engaged with the regulator.
Yeah, so just think for that piece, right? For anybody who's coming to this, you have to go to your bank, even with LRS, right? Not even talking about pre-LRS where you have to go ODI, 15CA, 15CP, go through the structure, do the declaration, put all of that, go to your bank, and then they'll ask you to sign a waiver to say, yes, this is there. You should have banked with your bank for a certain period of time. I think initially it was a minimum you have to have banked with them for at least 2 years or those kinds of pieces. To a stage where you're almost saying, look, I'm going to go through this end process, right? And I'll guarantee you this. We'll be the quickest across the world because even today, in a place like Singapore, in a place like Dubai, it takes much longer than that. So, 2 years, I think, yeah, I kind of want to shift gears, right? This was mostly on the personal side, right? In terms of individuals going and working through. It'll be good to hear from you on the bigger picture, right? Country to country, right? We're talking about capital movement, we're talking about what maybe you can start with very quick. What is you say that you are an independent regulator. How does that differentiate you from RBI kind of structure or SEBI kind of structure? Maybe you can start with that and then we will talk about what does it mean when you say that you are almost borderless within the country in some sense. Right? I call this as borderless within the country.
That's a very interesting way to put it. So he gave me the perfect segue by talking about between touch points and stuff like that. So for my background, before I came to this new regulator, I was in Mumbai working with another regulator. I was with RBI and their kind of so I have a fair mindset of what happens there. But here it is different. That's exactly what you're trying to ask. So for those who do not know, probably to bring them up to speed on the call as well. In GIFT City, there are two areas. GIFT City is in Gandhinagar. One is the domestic tariff area and other is the SEZ, the special economic zone. So domestic tariff area is just like domestic India. So I'm going to use the word domestic India as if I've come from somewhere else, but bear with me somewhere, just to drive home the point. So DTA is like domestic India, just like the rest of India, whereas most of us know what an SEZ is, the special economic zone. So within the SEZ is this new entity called IFSC, the International Financial Service Center. It's a jurisdiction. So this is a foreign jurisdiction. So what I mean by that is the Indian rupee cannot be used for business there in this jurisdiction. It is territorially within India, but you can't use the Indian rupee. Right? So in a way, when I was talking to the Israeli regulators when I was there in Israel and Sri Lanka, I was talking to the central bank guys of Sri Lanka, they were like amazed at this innovation by the Indian government, where we went ahead and created a jurisdiction so that the capital controls on the rupee is bypassed. So essentially in that jurisdiction, there is no capital control problem because rupee is not the currency of business. It could be the dollar, it could be the pound, it could be any of those 6, 7 convertible foreign currency. That's the denomination of business. That is that jurisdiction, right? It's a very small area. Like I always say, New York is not that big. Trillions of assets sits in 8 blocks across this way and that way. So it's a vertical city, essentially. Now, when we started this IFSC, the 4 domestic sector regulators were the regulators for that. So essentially, a bank comes up, RBI gives the license, an exchange comes up, SEBI gives the license, insurance company comes, IRDA gives the, so on and so forth. But then for the ease of doing business and all these regulators are, except for SEBI and RBI in Mumbai, there's another in Delhi and one in Hyderabad. The government said, okay, let's create a new regulator, a unified regulator with the powers of these 4 regulators. So it's a 4-in-1 regulator. So the IFSCA is the authority for IFSC. That's why IFSCA is the new regulator. And the IFSCA Act was passed by the Parliament in 2019. And we came into being in 2020, I think around October time, but getting the infrastructure and everything. So in the IFSCA Act, you have the RBI Act, the SEBI Act, some 15 odd acts are put into it, giving us the powers of all the 4 regulators. But for that jurisdiction only. So we are not the regulator for whole of India. That's a misconception people have. So let me clarify that. This is a very small jurisdiction, but you have a unified regulator there now. So which means that jurisdiction is not under the domain of an RBI or SEBI or IRDA or PFI. So if a bank has to be set up, they get IFSCA's license. When a broker, exchange, and clearing house, insurance, reinsurance house, fund, whoever wants to come there, they come to us for the license, authorization, registration, whatever you want to call it. So that's how the whole thing is. Now, see, when you look from an RBI perspective, I've seen that perspective. You're balancing between the common man and the most sophisticated, private foreign banks to cooperative banks. Whereas here in IFSC, I don't have that challenge. I can be more adventurous. So that's where when she said startup regulator, probably we just got started and we are all a bundle of energy. Now, why did the government create the IFSC in the first place? That's something we need to understand. Forget about IFSC as a regulator. Why did we have an IFSC? What was happening is talent and capital was moving out of the country or leaving the country. It was going to offshore. It was going to Singapore, it was going to Dubai, whatever places. Most of the companies are in BVI, Mauritius, wherever, right? So how do we attract that good capital, that good talent back? So I needed to create an offshore in the country. So this IFSC is the offshore, which we created onshore. So it is essentially territory inside the country, but it is an offshore location. Now, what does it mean? Today, if you're sending funds from US to India, since somebody in Bangalore is using funds, then it is an FDI. You go through FEMA, RBI's FEMA comes in play. When you send money from Bangalore to US, it's an ODI, again the FEMA is there. But when you're going to send money into the IFSC, that's a foreign jurisdiction, which means there is no FEMA, there is no FDI. It's like if you're sending money from US to Dubai, the same way sending money from US to IFSC, which is inside the city. Similarly, if you have to send money outside, no issues, no FEMA, no ODI. It's as good as sending from Singapore to Dubai, Dubai to IFSC, IFSC to US. It's all the same. That's the kind of freedom which is coming. And second part, on the regulatory side, there's been a lot of restrictions which has been removed. We have studied the model, not only what was restrictive in India, but also the international regulations. We looked at Singapore, we looked at Dubai. So essentially, for those of you who don't know, today probably the IFSC is the only zone in the country which gives you 100% corporate tax exemption in India. There is no other zone in the country. So people run to Dubai for a tax regime which is zero. You have a same zero corporate tax regime in India, in the IFSC, and it is for 10 or 15 years. You choose which 10 you want. First 2-3 years you're not making profit, it's okay, you can do it in the 4th year, but you can take for 10 years that corporate tax exemption. No GST in IFSC, zero GST, right? And under the new tax regime, you can essentially get zero MAT as well as some provisions. And if you're listing on, there are already 2 international exchanges in the IFSC, right? So NSE has set up an exchange in the IFSC called NSE IFSC. And BSE has set up an international exchange called India INX. So if you're listing on that and doing things, it's again zero STT, zero. I mean, literally, it's kept at zero on most of the tax elements, making it as competitive as any other jurisdiction. So if you look at it, right, debt markets or your equity or derivative markets. So debt, Singapore taxation not very favorable. People look at India, Mauritius, things like that. You look at capital derivatives, probably they would not want to look at Mauritius, but they look at India and Singapore because of the stability they need. And now look at the cost of talent in Singapore, cost of real estate in Singapore versus the same cost in IFSC. At 1/4, you get it. In fact, there are a lot of Singapore companies who are exploring because some of them tell me their rentals went over by 70% in the last 1 or 2 years. In the renewing the lease. So even governments are talking to us. You know, I'm not talking more about it, but then there were budget inclinations and we'll see more about it. So net, what I'm trying to say here is we had a problem. We are trying to come up with a solution, making it on par with the global best practices, tax regime, regulatory practices, so that we have a very thriving IFSC here. Challenge to be solved, and the vision is probably a short-term look at Dubai and Singapore, and in the long term, why not challenge London and New York?
So just to put that into perspective, right? Basically it means that you had a lot of the VCs park the money in Mauritius, PBI. You don't need to do that anymore. Right? First point for you to understand. If you remember, a lot of our Indian companies wanting to list, you would go into the NYSE and do an ADR essentially, right? Or go into NASDAQ and do an ADR and process, right? So think about doing a gift ADR effectively, right? NSE ADR from that perspective. Now, what that allows you to do is essentially look at it as almost a channel where you're going to go through and figure out in all your hedging structures, right? In fact, I've even started to talk about whenever he talks about it, he said about insurance and reinsurance. There was a conversation that I was having saying, how do you create a multi-currency insurance and a reinsurance structure around? Yeah, so think about that as anything that you did as a cross-border. Anybody who had, for example, any shipper who had a vehicle, any of our airlines who were leasing planes, right? We were using instruments outside of the country, right? So it didn't matter who that was. It didn't matter whether it was an Indigo. It didn't matter whether it was Spice. Anybody that you think of, anybody who had to do any global lease had to go and figure out how to make that happen. Some other instrument structure outside. And now you are saying that I have the ability to be able to manage that, right? And I have to have the ability of creating your own currency basket and manage that, right? So that's a fundamental. I'll come back to them, but there's something else that I want all of you to realize. When we talk about cross-border, it's not just things going out, right? With the growth in our services export, as we start working, I don't know if some of you have looked at the remittances that is incoming remittances. We have had record incoming remittances in the last few years, and the expectation is that it's going to grow much more. Right? Now, that has been a very, very inefficient mechanism in most of the cases. So we are one of those few countries where even a blue collar worker religiously sends money at least 3 times a month. And then these are averages that we're working. And those payments are either to repay a loan of a house in India or to pay a student education, their child education, or their parent or some house sustenance that they make as a payment. So there's a whole section of society who's kind of saving in their respective geographies only to send that money back into it. Right? And that community, that large set of people today have had to go through a case where they have been charged at least thrice on every single transaction. What do I mean by thrice? In a lot of cases, they do not even have the ability to have a open account and have somebody manage that for them, right? So they are actually taking money out from an almost like an ATM, which means that they pay a withdrawal charge. Then they have a transaction charge, which means that you are sending the money to India. And then on top of that, you have the currency conversion charge, right? Until recently, there also used to be a distribution charge once you get to India. Now with the UPI, the distribution has got to zero, but you still had the three other charges that you had. So net, it didn't matter what mechanism you used. Even if you wanted to, some of these places, even for withdrawal, you are charged a very small percent, very small, 20 basis point, 30 basis point. But by the time you add this up, you would then figure out that you were spending upwards of 4 or 5%, and I'm sure you've seen much higher numbers as well. So today, I think India will have the infrastructure of not just doing the outbound, will also have the ability to bring this on an inbound basis. Right? And this allows us to do things much quicker, also do payments, also do gifting, also do a lot of other things that we have never thought of until now. Right? So if somebody had to give in one of our other investing companies, we have this use case where somebody wants to save in India in gold. You will think, why is that, right? But the point is very clear. The saving is for a particular event, sister's marriage. So there is a piece where there's an accumulation that is going to happen, and the money goes in. And where does it go? It goes and sits in today in a gold dealer, right? It's not even a digital, but it's sitting in a gold dealer. And then all of that is kind of a broken system because everybody charges 2-3% on every single bit of that transaction, right? And you start working and adding that up, you're talking about a significant amount, and these numbers are going up through the sky. So, for a minute, think of the complete trade, both at an individual level, a B2C level, and a B2B level, and then you will start to see how big is that opportunity when we talk about cross-border, right? You want to do one more set of updates? Yeah.
I kind of had some questions, thoughts. I share. So again, you said B2C, and given our experiences, talking more for the C or on behalf of the C, so to say, behalf of the customer, the individual. I think one of the great things that kind of IFSC and City as an opportunity that presents is, like you said, keeping the capital in India, but opening up opportunities perhaps as much as they are globally. Do you think it makes sense to make it easier than, say, global? Make it easier or more attractive to send money into GIFT City from India? So instead of sending money directly to the US or the UK or Canada or wherever, if I could first send it to GIFT City, if that could be easier, then obviously a lot of people who otherwise send money out will essentially keep it in India. Right? And then it goes from there. And anyway, from GIFT City to everywhere else is as much as that's the same. So that is one thought, that could there be potential easing in that kind of framework? And as Ravi said, the costs are extremely high for cross-border, and partly because of currency conversion, partly because of people being unaware of volumes, and partly because a lot of banks and exchanges tend to charge. Even they don't pass on the benefits of scale to the customers many times. A lot of this is channelized via which could probably become a lot easier, cheaper, and therefore scaled in volumes. But has there been any thinking? Has there been any thought process in that?
So two different aspects, right? One, sending money to GIFT City and parking it there. I'll use it as GIFT IFSC than GIFT City because there is a domestic area to it, so I don't want to confuse it. So when you open an account in IFSC, you're essentially opening a dollar. It's not a rupee account, it's rupee as a business name. You can use rupee for your admin expenses, that's a different story. But business, your invoice, if you're raising, it should be in dollars or what. Similarly, the account you open, the IBUs as we call it, you are opening a dollar account. Today, what happens is after a President Indian moves money to the IBU, within a fixed number of days, 15 days or so, if it's not invested, it's repatriated, which is not a fair thing because for other jurisdictions, RBI is allowed up to 180 days. So it has been taken up to the governor and is looking into it. So we restored parity, so no worries on that. But the catch is, yeah, it could be, we are looking at a lot of retail products. Today it is not very developed for retail, but the banks are looking into it. So if somebody wants to transfer, let's say there is an ICICI bank, you have it in Mumbai branch, and there is ICICI in GIFT IFSC too. KYC, everything is done. ICICI knows you as a customer, you're a preferred customer. Some of these things can be very seamless from that aspect. Second thing is, look at the time zone part. You're dealing with dollars and you want some clearing to happen in London, and you need money here in Indian time zone. You have to wait for them to come up that branch and things like that. But if things can happen in your own time zone, ICICI Mumbai talking to an ICICI and IFSC, that's going to be. So there will be some innovations coming. The banks are working, we are also working. But from a retail perspective, it is not as much as we wanted right now because the focus was more on the business to business. Second, on cross-border, very important topic. Even the UN SDG goals has that we need to bring it less than 5-6%, 6% or whatever it is. That it's 7 or 8. They're targeting 3-4%. A lot of statistics studies have been done. So what we did was when we took over the IFSC, we kind of took the regulations from RBI, SEBI, IRDI. We studied globally what the other regulators like MAS, PFSA, FCA, all these people were doing, and we tried to create it. But what we felt was there was a big gap. There was no regulation for fintechs. It was an uncharted territory, right? And we thought, okay, that's not a good thing to do because if we have to give them some semblance, give them some credibility, and help them create innovations, we have to give some clear regulatory directions. It cannot be like in a no man's land or planet. So that's how we embarked on a journey to create something called as the fintech entity framework. So we created a regulatory framework exclusively for fintechs to start with. But then as we deliberated, we figured out that the definition of fintech itself is a very nebulous thing which is going on, right? So there are people who provide platforms to the banks, and they are called fintechs. But then actually, in our definition, after we looked around and we looked at FSB, and other things, we felt they were tech fits. Their technology companies were helping the financial institutions. So we thought, okay, the fintech entity framework should include both because it's very difficult to split that up. Right? Today, there are companies which do KYC, property transaction monitoring. It's coming under a kind of an area called RegTech. You would have heard about it. And most people say RegTech is a fintech. But for me, RegTech is a tech thing. Because they have technology for financial institutions. So then that's how we went to the fundamental of how do we define it. And we said, okay, let's create a regulatory framework for fintechs and tech fins together. Fintechs are verticals. You have to be either in banking, capital markets, insurance, doing those activities. Banking means you're doing cross-border, you're handing customers money, right? It's not a platform where it's just passing through, right? Similarly, capital markets, insurance, being a unified regulator, I looked at all this. And then I looked at tech fins and I said, they are not verticals, they are horizontals, which means something like a digital identity is a tech fin for me. You need digital identity for the banking, you need that for capital markets, you need that for insurance. So we kind of extended that beyond. We said, how about cybersecurity? As a financial sector regulator, I'm worried about the financial stability from a cyber risk. So I said, let me include that as well under the tech fin. That's where it led to quantum. In fact, you won't know, we have given the regulatory nod for 2 quantum techs in IFSC. They already have our approval they're working on, and one of them, or both of them applied for a grants as well, right? So it's because as a financial sector regulator, I know 4-5 years from now, quantum is going to disrupt be it core banking, mobile banking, whatever system. So we need to be ready for it. So I need to help the innovation in the industry, right? Similarly, we look at green, the climate, green, sustainable agri. That's the next thing which is coming. So we included that in the tech fair. So basically today you have a framework, regulatory framework, fintech and tech fairs covering all these aspects, agri-tech, green tech, space tech. We know in another few years, the space economy and the lunar economy are going to be on the forefront. And the example I keep repeating is, 10, 15 years back, if I ask somebody about the climate risk, people will be thinking about scientists and environmentalists. But today, if I talk about climate, global, people are talking about regulators, financial institutions, because you need capital. So what we did, we took a futuristic approach. We reached out to Department of Space, ISRO, and we signed an MOU. Probably we are the first regulator in the world to sign an MOU with the Department of Space, where we are collaborating on space techs, on the geospatial intelligence being given to the agri-techs, the green techs. Agri-techs because an agri-tech can give a better crop insurance, my domain, financial sector, can give a crop loan to the farmer, loan, lending, financial instrument. As a financial sector regulator, I'm interested. Green fintech, because greenwashing is happening. The same geospatial intelligence is helping avoid greenwashing to certain extent. Again, I'm interested, right? So that's how we are stitching together the ecosystem. So if you look into our fintech entity framework, Google it out and look at Annexure 1, it gives the entire range of things we are trying to keep under this frame. And in that we have cross-border too. Now coming to the second part of it. The cross-border, I've seen traditional applications come in, and we have also included Web 3.0 in our TechFin area, because Web 3.0 is a TechFin for me. It's a horizontal across. I've seen very innovative solutions where using distributed ledger, tokens, they're doing atomic settlements, literally killing all those 2-3% in between, whatever you said, literally trying to do. So a lot of such innovative solutions are there. In fact, I was 2-3 minutes late because we were talking about tokenization solution and settlement like this, on the blockchain again. So a lot of innovative solutions are there. What is stopping us from making it go live full-fledged is this. Today, we do not have proper regulations for blockchain or smart contracts. What happens if something goes wrong in a smart contract? How is my consumer protected? Because as a regulator, I need to look at that as well, right? So what we are doing is we are not saying no to the innovation. We're taking them and putting them into a regulatory sandbox, because every regulator is worth its salt in the regulatory sandbox. And along with them, we are co-creating this regulation. We are thinking, do we need to create something for blockchain or specific smart contract, or is it stablecoin we need to look at? Various aspects. It's not that we have created anything, but we want the innovators, the industry to be there in the sandbox. And we want to work jointly with them to create this, because we are in uncharted territory, to be honest. And as I always say, as regulators, we cannot override innovation. We need the innovators to do this.
So, a good segue from a VC perspective. I don't know how many of you really practice, but about a decade ago, typically VCs would not touch anything that's regulated, right? They would not, right? Not even, I would say, decade is probably not right, even much recent than that. If I remember a time where we would go in and say that, look, are you doing anything in insurance? No, we don't touch it because it's regulated, right? Or I want to do this. But think about the fundamental difference, right? You are now having the regulate, essentially startups. I believe as you start developing, I believe both the VCs and the startups, you need to start getting comfortable with being regulated at some stage, at some kind of point, right? I think that's a fundamental piece that if you are a startup in this particular area, start to get comfortable, right? Because as I said, 10 years ago, they wouldn't invest, but today there is a clear understanding, and there's an acknowledgement to the fact that If you really want to scale, if you really want to be recognized as a disruptor, then you have to work with the regulator structure, with this process, and then be able to scale, right? Otherwise, at some stage, you are going to be shut down in some shape or form, right? And you'll see this happening across the board, right? 2 years ago, you saw hundreds of people getting into BNPL. I know at some stage, you're going to start having people come back and push back and say, hey, this is not a sustainable model both from a VC perspective and from a startup perspective. You can't, just because there's a gold rush, you can't go in and say this is the Wild West and go in, get floating and shooting people off because I want to get to the gold first, right? So the first and foremost, I think, is that startups are starting to acknowledge the fact that you need to work with the regulation. You need to work with compliance to that extent and be able to work that, right? And those are the things that I think we want to understand, because for you to be able to get comfortable with the regulation, you have to now start doing deeper work, not just on the tech side, right? So the moment you say I'm going to work with the regulator, you have to go beyond tech, right? Into simple things like your processes, into your own oversight of how you're going to manage and be able to work. So, Siddharth, I'm going to come back to you, right? Your experience in working with regulators, both in India and outside.
Yeah, so when we started thinking of Scorpio in the beginning, much like a lot of engineering first or tech first companies, we said we are building a technology company. And we'll only work with those who are regulated, but we will never get regulated because who knows what all pitfalls are there, and you need, a lot more capital, etc., etc., to actually do the changing regulation and so forth. We build a tech plan. But as we kind of dug into it a little bit deeper, we started learning that there are very clear commercial advantages of getting regulated in our space, in the cross-border space, basically. And within that, looking at capital markets, banking. So if you're making 100 rupees, without getting regulated, you will probably get 5 rupees out of that. Because the 95 rupees actually go to the regulated players who've taken the effort and taken the responsibility, of customer deposits, of handling capital and cash and so on. So we essentially then it became a commercial decision that, you're leaving 95% of the money on the table by not being regulated. And of course, it did happen with us. A couple of VCs said no, that we don't per se invest in regulated spaces because it's just not in our thesis, or it's too complicated and so on, and we don't know where it will go. But then, in my mind as an entrepreneur, we were very clear. We were very clear that we have to embrace regulation if we really have to solve the problems that we are solving. So, work with the US regulator, work with the Indian regulator, work with newer regulators in whichever jurisdictions you're kind of good to be in. So at this point of time, we have touch points with regulators in the US, India, DIFC in Dubai, and MAS in Singapore. And our learning has been that increasingly, obviously, with the changing world, regulation does evolve. But there are people fortunately who are more open. With startups and with the innovations that may be attempted by folks that so they're happy to listen and engage. And as long as you're willing to kind of go through that, there is a time, there is a cost of getting regulated and of managing compliance and so on. But there is a benefit, and the benefit is extremely commercial. So we had to deal with SEBI. It took us about a year to get a concrete response from SEBI, but it did come. With RBI, last year there was a cross-border remittance sandbox. In fact, it took about a year or 8-9 months, to come to fruition, but it did come to fruition. Getting regulated as just a simple task of getting a license itself in most jurisdictions takes time. In the US, we got a license. It took us about 8-9 months to get it. So it does take time. And fair enough, the checks and balances need to be there. Otherwise, everybody will want to get regulated just for the sake of it. But I think we found increasingly better interaction. But I also think that there is just a lot more that companies and regulators can do together. And there, I think that while there is a sandbox mechanism that tends to get followed, I think And we were talking about this a little bit earlier, that if there was a way that startups knew how to work with regulators. This is not common knowledge. This is tribal knowledge which kind of gets built by doing it. So everybody goes through the pitfalls and then you talk to friends and so on in the space and then you learn. But if there was a way in which a startup which is operating in a regulated space, and to be honest, most spaces are regulated now. If you're in the food space, you're dealing with the FSSAI. If you're in electric vehicles, you're dealing with the regulation there. If you are in mobility or taxi aggregation, you're dealing with multiple state regulators. So in every business where you're actually making a meaningful difference, there is some or the other regulator that you have to end up dealing with. And the benefits of that, far outweigh the pitfalls in the end. So if there could be a way of, learning how to engage with regulators in general and with specific regulators over time, I think there's a lot of merit.
Yeah,
The only point I would want to add is that in some ways, regulation and licenses was used as a moat, right? And that's something that
It's a moat as well because everybody else is afraid of getting it. So everybody thinks it's a black box. I don't know who to talk to, who to speak with if it's the RBI or the SEBI in India or with any other regulator. Because everybody else is hesitant to approach the regulator. And also when you're innovating, you also try to push the boundaries a little bit, obviously. Right? So people kind of think that, okay, what if I push it too much? They say no. The biggest thing is what they say no, right? And I will try what I'm doing. And because of that, most people stay away from regulation. So it becomes a moat for those who actually get into it.
just to add to that, right? See, so that it's a perfect segue to the pushing the limits. So from KYC, AML, CFT, right? I think you already touched upon. That will be a little non-negotiable for the regulator, right? Because you need to know who you're dealing with. Today, the kind of complex structures which come from holding company, those jurisdictions, the different licenses, this jurisdiction, there are some other licenses, NBFC, bank. I mean, across jurisdictions. It's not just India. You're in Singapore, you're in Delaware, you're here, there, a lot of places. So it becomes very complex. So that's where this KYC, AML becomes important for us. More from a sovereign perspective. You all have heard of data, ATM, right? You do not want the country to get into a grey list or anything like that, which means all these controls are definitely yes. And this year we are going to go for a initial evaluation with the down. So those will be the key. That's one. The second thing is, if as a regulator I have a larger domain to look at, and I have a range of things to look at, then where do I prioritize? Do I look at the macro picture, or do I look at one small innovation sitting in the corner? Because just look at what happened in Sri Lanka. I was there, even the cab driver is talking economics to me. He said 240% rise in my gas price, sir. I was shocked. Is he an economist? Or look what the thing did to a cab driver in Sri Lanka because of where the economy went. He knows IMF loan, he knows everything. I was really shocked and so surprised. So we don't want to go there. So there is certain bandwidth which goes in all those activities. In fact, talk about dealing with multiple regulators. The US, somebody told me that they had to deal with 17 regulator and non-regulated, pseudo-regulator things to do some things in the banking ecosystem. And when we were in the Indo-US financial regulatory dialogue, we did ask a question. I'm not going to tell you what the question is on digital assets. And there were all the regulators here, right? From Fed Reserve to SEC, CFTC, and all. And unfortunately, I couldn't get a coherent answer from them, right? Because there are just too many regulators, and whose remit does it fall into? Still, it's
boundary that they want to go ahead and own that space, right?
But
SEC
but
says
one thing which I saw, so not to dive into that conversation, keeping that as when you're getting regulated, what I saw in our domain, small firms who had no real backing, like they were not into the CDCs of the world, they didn't have any big brands like backing them. I saw that when they got this authorization or limited to the position under a regulatory framework for fintechs, Some of them were able to raise capital. Some of the credibility went down. Some people were able to get more customers. Some were able to go to the banks in the IFSC itself and partner with them. To give an example, I talked about quantum, not to again dwell on that, but I'm just telling you, you might think quantum is very far-fetched. But when these guys, after getting our nod, went and spoke to a couple of banks in the IFSC, I'm not naming anybody, they have now got a project to do quantum random number generator to test as the OTP mechanism for the bank. Okay, so just a small regulatory nod or an authorization to a very lesser known company who had all bootstrapped, right? Suddenly open doors. And that's an innovation I want to support because the ecosystem needs it.
So, any questions? The only piece that I would want to do 2 minutes. If you things we touched about crypto digital asset, right? So, in some ways, I think there were a few people who were asking before I got here, to say, are we going to cover some bits of this? One is, I believe, and this is personal belief, that there are two things that we have really not finished. One is the fractionalization structure, or whatever we want to say. We're starting to see this happen. Real estate, I'm sure we're going to start seeing in listed pieces, unlisted, we're going to have derivatives being fractionalized. We're going to see a lot more other things, including commodity structures being fractionalized. So one is the fractionalization structure. Other one is you kind of hinted to self-executing contracts and that piece. What do you see as the hindrance for taking that and at least making that work? Because there is some acceptance inside, there is some acceptance outside. Not just the domestic piece. You'll see that happening much bigger outside in the foreign trades of the borderless piece.
So you're touching on the digital assets part of it. And that's a very controversial area, to be very honest. And as a regulator, I'm daring to stick out there. It has to be a personal view than an official view, right? So today the world is still divided. That's what the G20 also points to. We're trying to see, can we do a global coordination on crypto? So there are some countries who want to do it because they want the stable points to come to. Probably they have stayed behind on the CBDC. They know somebody else is taking over the CBDC. The established payment rates, the hegemony challenged, so they want certain things. And there are some other countries who have others. So I don't think we have a consensus there yet on the global part of it. Different countries are at different levels. Be it stable coins, CBDC, parallel rates, SWIFT, whatnot. The entire geopolitical equations out there, everybody knows the world. That's on one side. Second side is the very crypto ecosystem itself. The governance of that, the maturity of that. I don't want to name all the events which happened, right? You can start with Terra Luna to all the meltdown sessions and FTX. I mean, we can keep going on. But fundamentally, there are some governance issues and the maturity has to come. Okay? So there is still some work to be done, right? So personally, I believe the way it is moving, you have embedded finance, sustainable finance, and decentralized finance. So the last one, I do believe is coming. I'm not pushing it under the carpet. But is it right here? Probably not. Some more time, right? The smart contracts, yes, the legal framework, we need to get around it. Then it can make atomic settlements 24/7. That is possible. And for your information, we have already given a nod for tokenization of bonds. It's right now happening in our regulatory sandbox, right? So bonds is like all the ticket size is huge. So we have kind of given the tokenization part of it. So basically the technology of crypto is definitely there. But cryptocurrency per se, where it goes to an exchange and the entire system is gamed or speculated, that's where the challenge comes in. So the credibility gets lost for the credible guys themselves too. Right? So what we have done is we have encouraged closed loop cryptos. This tokenization of bonds is a closed loop. Of course, on and off ramp they go in, but with fiat. And that crypto is not listed or traded on any cryptocurrency exchange outside. So I am sure that nobody is speculating. Right. And it does its job. It does tokenization, fractional, whatever, and it brings in that atomicity, the benefits of the technology. Exactly. So it is happening. We are encouraging it. We have projects which are there in our sandbox. Once they successfully, get our confidence by kind of proving whatever they claim is what is happening, we will give them the full authorization status and they will go live. So we are open to it.
Yeah, types of question. This is for Joseph. Joseph Sharath here from India Rocket. So my question is around the sustainable finance, or most particularly about the carbon credits, because in one of the Ministry of Finance report, it was recommended that voluntary carbon market can be set up in a big city. And there's a parliament amendment to that effect as well, where now carbon credits can be traded in a different fashion. So where do you see the potential and opportunity for startups to come and build the infrastructure for voluntary carbon markets to begin with, and what can you support in terms of grants and big cities willing to help?
Great. I'm so happy you asked that question. So probably I'll take the second part first. That's the grants part. So today, as I said, we might be the only regulator, natural sector regulator in the country who are giving grants. There are 6 types of grants which we give. One is for the fintechs or startups. It's very small change, not huge, right? It starts with 15 lakhs. And it goes up to 30 lakhs when somebody is in our sandbox. So it's a sandbox grant. Then it goes up to 50 lakhs. Up a crore if you are doing a POC, which is very revolutionary in our sandbox, right? And we talk about the exchanges. You need to go all the way to NASDAQ to list. So if you're listing in the exchange, in the IFSC, the 2 exchanges, we are also giving a 15 lakh grant for them to do those red hearing prospectors and all those road shows and all this stuff. That's there. And we also do 10 lakh per cohort grant to an accelerator. We believe accelerators can help the ecosystem. So every cohort they run, we have some conditions, but we get 10 lakhs per cohort. And lastly, we have a grant for green fintechs, which is about 75 lakhs. That's the highest. So it ranges from 10, 15 to 75 lakhs. That's our grant scheme. That's focused on green sustainable area, because we believe that is very important for the entire ecosystem. So that's on the grant part of it. And what I've seen is, I'm not naming the company, but the gentleman came to my office early this week too. And he said, what happened to my grant application? I said, yeah, we're working on it, the committee is sitting on it, but there's a lot of process. It's government, there's a committee, there's minutes, there's approval and stuff. I said, see, we're getting away 50 lakhs. 30 lakhs, whatever the grant you're applying for. And it's peanuts to what you're doing. Project he is doing is a cutting edge area, not telling anything much about his project for confidentiality. He needs at least 7 to 10 crores minimum. So why are you behind me for this pittance? He told me one statement. He said, I spoke to a VC. He's ready to give me 10 crores if I can get this pittance from IFSC. The regulator is giving you a grant. I'm willing to back it up. So he said, even if you give me, the least amount, but if I get it from a regulator, I have an entire ecosystem backing me, right, from US to UK and all these places. So that opened my eyes too. I said, oh my God, is it that powerful a statement we are making? So that's the kind of feedback we are getting. Same thing I saw with the approvals we gave and it opened doors. Even the grants is also creating some waves, is what I got to know. Now come to the first part of your question. We did have a expert committee, very good set of guys who did recommend that. The challenge we are seeing is on the taxonomy part for your entire sustainable finance ecosystem. The taxonomy which the Western world has and what we need, I think we need to find some common ground, and I hope G20 does that right. So, see, India is a growing country. I can't overnight go all clean energy. I need to have a transition plan, just as they call it, the just transition has to happen. So that's where the fundamental problem is to get it really, go full steam. And many others. Once that is clear, then we have to have regulations. So the law, the policy, and the regulations and all this stuff will come in. But it's going to happen sooner or later. But if I wait for all those things, the innovation will not happen. So what I did, or rather what we did, is there were applications which came in, which were trying to do some of these voluntary carbon market activity on a blockchain. Somebody was trying to build it. I said, why don't you apply? Let's put it on the sandbox and see how it works. So that's kind of work in progress. So we are very close to giving them an on, right? All the things, the either dotted and legal laws. So what I'm trying to say here is we are going to encourage that innovation building. So I'm sure you've heard about carbon exchange, Climatex, all those guys. Some of the applications which I have received from our Indian innovators can challenge them. So they are very innovative solutions using distributed ledger technology. They are trying to map how to create that voluntary carbon credits. In fact, they also got some of European clients to pay for the carbon credits they want to create out from India. So it is happening. We are supporting it from the infrastructure part of it, from the technology part of it. But the policy, the regulation around it might take some time. But I think even to refine and mature your solution, the technology part also will take some time. So by the time that comes in, we should be ready. If not, as IFSC, we are an independent regulator, right? I could create something for our own jurisdiction and let them take wings. So we are empowered for that.
And in fact, I've written a paper for T20, the T20 on which talks specifically about carbon credits. So I've given few solutions. I'm just waiting for them to do and it goes well and
This for G20.
for T20, the T20.
T20.
T20. So what I did was, and I think this is being done by the ORF team of the research foundation. So they quoted the abstract, and one of my abstract was selected. So I have presented two technological standards because this market is completely fragmented. We are not following what UK is saying or what Western is saying, but there can be a harmonization of standards, and that's where India's presidency, the presidency can play the role. So I've shared the thoughts with them. Let's see if it goes.
So 2 points there. One, if you could share that with me, I can also take a look at it.
Sure, we'll do that.
Second is the third FMCG most likely will happen in Bangalore. That's a financial ministers and central bank governors meeting. I think the first one happened here in Bangalore, right? And sustainable finance is a very core theme for the third FMCG. We also have a role to play with probably some of the details will be announced in the phase 2. So I'm just getting myself for that.
Sure, we'll share the draft.
Yeah, there's a lot of other activities happening. For example, the exchanges that we concept. Right? I don't know if you saw there was an announcement that I was talking to Sandhya about. Indonesia is not something. Indonesia is one ahead. Along with Petronas, I kind of made an announcement last week with some 10 days ago, where they're talking about London Stock Exchange and Petronas and the government of Malaysia are going in for the framework for all of Petronas ecosystem. For them, they are the largest in the country, right? So it kind of spreads across and push that. So there's a whole lot of activity happening there. And in some ways, the big boys are somebody like LSE wanting to come in means that they want to be seen as playing in that space and going in that kind of space. Yeah, any other questions? Okay.
My question is again to Joseph. My name is Nicholas. I spent 7 years. Yeah. You know me. My name is Nicholas. Spent the last 7 years in cross-border banking. Very, I would say, contemporary question regarding kind of all of this and SCB. And these are all external figures, but just help me out here. Just want to understand how GIFT IFSC is playing a role here. Apparently, about 3,000 plus funded SaaS startups in India.
roughly 2 billion is part. STP, and my understanding is also 200 million is moved to, offshore accounts and GIFT IFSC. Besides what you've already stated, benefits on tax holidays, GST, and so on. What would be the other benefits for startups that are raising capital, want to hold capital and GIFT IFSC, transact treasury management, other longer term solutions besides, let's say, a short term fix? How do you see GIFT IFSC actually addressing this?
Yeah, that's a good point. So, treasury is definitely an area of focus. In fact, Indian Oil, their treasury operations have moved worldwide to GIFT IFSC. The other day, there was some other big OMCs talking to us, maybe consolidating all their treasury operations here. In the commercial space, major bank has also done that. Not meaning because it's a private bank. So that is definitely the original framework for them. So we saw that opportunity and we created a regulation. See, that's a beauty of being a regulator, right? You can create a regulation, create a regulation. But the catch is, does the market really want it? Right? And if there is a market need, we need to ensure it should be light touch, or wherever it needs to be regulated, it has to be regulated. So definitely treasury is there. See, some of you, I think the top 2 or 3, there will be a survey. There is some 7 or 10 reasons why people want to move into privacy, especially on the fund side. Top 2, 3 which came up was, taxation was always there, but they looked at the low cost of talent, because we have a lot of talent in India, right? And especially if I see that area is coming, soon it could be the accountant to the world kind of a scenario. A lot of talent in and around Ahmedabad area from the accounting and those perspectives. And that was one. Second was the real estate cost also, in addition to a favorable regulatory stance there, because a lot of innovations have happened. So wherever there has been a restriction, you would have seen that there have been a lot of circulars from the various ministries clearing that for IFSC. There are specific circulars coming from ministries which says this is excluded for IFSC because we want to really promote it. I'll give you an example. In the SEZ, every company has to have a separate address or premises. If I have a subsidiary, you're supposed to have a separate. You cannot have it or house it under the same roof when you say I'm going to have it. It's not permitted. Active leasing was something we touched upon. It's a new line of business in India, third largest growing Asian market. So IFSC being the perfect location, so we're going to Ireland and Singapore. We thought let's have a regulatory framework for active leasing, right? It's out, and instead of going to all those places, people are coming to IFSC. The resources are here, and the business is happening from IFSC. Of course, it's not competing with Ireland and Singapore as of today, but the way the Indian, guys are placing the orders, some of them look inward. We are going to be world leaders in no time. But the catch is the way it works is they buy and they sell it and then they take it back on lease at a very high level fabric. That's what the airlines do, so that the capex of scale can be managed, right? So for the lessor, what he does is he creates each lease as a separate company. There's a holding company because they don't want to go bankrupt for one guy defaulting. Now the SEC law says for each company you have to have a different office. Now we have created a new framework for active leasing, and now the SEZ law is acting as a deterrent or a inhibitor for them because they have to create now different offices. That seems absurd. So we took it all the way up to the Ministry of Commerce. Notification has come that for active leasing, they can be in the same room, under the same roof. So that's the kind of change we are making. I'll give another example. The third row 2 gentlemen were sitting here. I met them last time I came here. And they were very prompt. I think one of them sent me an application too, correct, for their thing. Like then there were other people also who have sent applications in the space where they are aggregating funds. Now, in my fintech entity framework, it was light touch framework. Right, it's for those nimble tech fins are also there, but not aggregate. Now, these not just one, there were cross-border companies who were doing aggregation of funds. You know what we have done? We have created a new department called Department of Payment Systems and Settlements, and we are trying to work on a framework where you can do aggregation in a better way. So they never asked for it, but we are creating those things. So what I'm trying to say here is a jurisdiction and a regulator who wants to stay very close to what the market needs. And as long as it's within the law, it's legal, it's ethical, right? And we are helping the ecosystem, furthering the 5 trillion economic goal. We're ready to go. That's the message.
Hi, Nitin here from Vouch. So, as a startup who's applying for the regulatory approval, what are the few pointers you would say, hey, maybe like the $5 trillion goal? Is that the goal IFSC is looking at, or just innovation, or what are the few pointers that a startup should focus on? And I have a follow-up question as well.
For me, I'm talking from an application perspective, right? Because I cannot talk from a startup's perspective because it's you and your solution and the market and product fit and all this stuff. From a regulator, what I look for is the clarity of thought and your solution, right? Because we get a lot of applications where they're not stitched end to end. That's one thing we look at. Because you might be very innovative in some aspects, but then, yeah, we're willing to support the innovation, but I need that clarity of thought. And that's one. Second, I told before also, KYC, AML, CFT, non-negotiable. There are people who apply. I have got applications from 12 jurisdictions till now, 12 jurisdictions in 12 countries. In some places, when I ask for the KYC, they don't send me those details. And I dispose of the application, saying that I'm not taking it forward because that's non-negotiable for me. I need to know who I'm dealing with. Because I'm a regulator. And trust me, this is a unified regulator. I have people from RBI, I have people from SEBI, I have people from IRDA and PFIA. All 4 regulators are sitting there in the same office. How difficult it's going to be with all the 4 thought process, right? So it's good actually. We get the best of the 4 worlds, but that's going to be non-negotiable. And third thing is, while we are a startup regulator, we still are part of the government. So there are certain things which will take time. Like he said, it takes 8-9 months to get some regulatory nod in some markets. In funds, for us, the average has been 1 to 3 months. For the fintech entity framework, we had a target of 30 days. Let me be very open and honest here. That was the target. But we were nowhere close to the target because sometimes all the information does not come on day one. It comes in bits and pieces. Sometimes our teams are not having the bandwidth to process all the applications. Like, so they take, because you need to do the regulatory due diligence. You cannot kind of skip things. You have to dot the I's and cross the T's. So that's where sometimes we feel a little kind of on the wrong side, like, hey, we could have done it faster, but a little patience can help. But overall, what we think is the risks which we look at for your solution, based on the risks is where we place them in the appropriate sandboxes, because we have different types of sandboxes. We don't put everybody into a regulatory sandbox on day one because you're dealing with live customers. Some of them have not even had a proper MVP. So without that, what happened to the cybersecurity of it? I am putting it live there, so I need a BAPT done. So they're like, why do you need BAPT? So some of those things become non-negotiable for it because you're going to have some live customers, live transactions, and I need to ensure the cybersecurity posture is good, right? So whatever we need, we will ask for it. All we need is a response, which is time bound, so that we can also process it. That's what I would say in a nutshell.
Just a follow-up question.
Just to add to that, right? And you mentioned very, very important. We've seen people who are saying that I want to be playing, especially when you go in and say it's not a closed structure of some kind. You are going to look at cross-border. The whole topic was cross-border.
we do not spend enough time first thinking through the whole security for structures and how am I going to make this scale, how am I going to make this work, what are the things that I need. It is going to get more and more as we go, it's going to get tougher and tougher, and I think the screening processes are going to get tougher. Responsibilities, right? And it's not, I've had people tell us, no, we are on AWS and that provides you all of that. It's not an answer, all the samples, right? You have to go and figure out how we are going to do it. So I think 2 points that I would call out is mentioned it, but you need to work on your patience level, especially if you're doing something cross-border has to be long, you have to be more patient. And 2, your preparedness level, what you thought you would want, you would be asked for compared to what you would really be asked for is going to be much wider.
Thanks for that. So a follow-up question would be like, when you go into the sandbox, that is like a regulated entity sandbox. Of course, sandbox have restrictions, say dollar amounts, number of customers, geographies. But like for a startup, let's say like that was an aggregator kind of a startup, which is offering services throughout the world. Now, if there are restrictions like, hey, choose few geographies, but like the startup can't tell its customers, hey, do aircraft leasing only for these countries, right? So how does that get addressed?
So the framework is in such a way that if you are an established player, you may not go to the sandbox. You can get a direct authorization. Okay, because you're been servicing customers, and our bar is pretty low because it's light touch. What we have put it is you've been in business for a year. You should have been making revenues in the last 3 years or something and not in profits. We are good. But then the scrutiny will be very high for a direct authorization. In fact, till date, I've given only for 4 people direct authorization. You can count it because it means you're completely free to do license. Your license is full. There is nothing which is stopping you. Right? So that is really top level scrutiny. But if you have been there in the market, no problem. The sandboxes come in when you're trying out new things. Right? You're trying out new markets. The uncharted territory for us, for you, for us. Like, see, somebody's doing something in a metaverse. I mean, I really don't know what kind of clientele they had already, but as a regulator, I'm willing to support them. But I also want to see that he succeeds in that. And it's not just about the regulatory comfort. It's also about you pivoting to something which works, because you can always fail. And that's why in our FP, the fintech entity framework, what we did was every regulator wants the regulated entity to be present in their jurisdiction so that they can supervise it. But what we looked at it and said was, if you are applying for a limited use authorization and want to be in the sandbox, you need not come to GIFT City at all. You can be anywhere in the world. You can be in Bangalore, you can be in Boston, Brazil, I don't care. Because if you're sitting wherever you are and you're in a regulatory sandbox and you're trying out things and if you fail, you can say, yeah, unsuccessful exit, experiment over, you can all go home. Now, if I ask you to set up a company there, now you have to dissolve the company, you have to do more paperwork to do that. And I do not want the innovators to be spending time on that. So that's why we created that kind of a luxury. In fact, this is the only framework in the world where you have fintechs, techfins under the same umbrella, and where for the sandbox, the limited use authorization, you need not be present in the jurisdiction. But there are exceptions. Only exception is if you're handing customers money in the sandbox, I want you under my nose. Right? So you don't let them sit in Timbuktu and do that because you're collecting customers' capital. But then tell me, for a tech fin, what customer capital are you going to do? You're going to become the platform. For carbon credits, already it's in a platform, so they can be anywhere in the world. That's how we kind of structure it.
Before I came in here, you touched upon the 8 convertible currencies.
It's 6, I believe. It's listed in a circular.
So the only ones, those are capital convertible currencies, are the fully convertible on a capital and current account basis. Those are the ones that get covered under the jurisdiction.
Yeah, so typically we issue a circular, right, where we say IFSCA supports these freely convertible currencies. I think today we have the Japanese yen, in the Singapore dollar, Hong Kong, US dollar, of course, the pound. So that's a circular which comes up from the banking department, and they are entitled to revise it based on how they feel, but it should be freely convertible currency in the world. So that is what is the currency of business in the IFSC. So which means if you have a business where you have clients in the US, you have clients in APAC, Africa, Australia, but you're raising in any of these currencies like invoices, you can as well be in IFSC and get all the benefits.
So my question is, let's say a US entity is invoicing an entity in the GIFT City. For the purpose of the US entity, what jurisdiction will GIFT City be considered as? Will it be considered as a US entity to US entity transaction or a US entity to an Indian entity transaction?
So gift IFSC and
Right.
GIFT City, right?
Yeah, not the domestic, but
Yes.
the,
So when you are registered in the GIFT IFSC.
Right.
Your company is called an IFSC private limited, whatever it is. Okay. And by default, you get that zero GST benefit. And the currency you're operating is in dollars. So when a US company is raising an invoice to you in dollars, you have a bank account which you opened in dollars. Okay. So you're not converting rupee to dollars and then paying to the US company who's raising. It's like a free dollar to dollar transaction. Just like if you're in Singapore and you're paying to a US customer, the same thing will happen here.
so it's practically like a dollar domestic transaction almost for them. For that purpose.
It's not domestic, that's not the right word, but you have a freely convertible currency at your end to pay back. In this case, dollars to dollars, right? No forex conversion, no FEMA. You know,
I understood the Indian regulations, that if I were to, so let's say create an entity, because a lot of people have trouble, billing
Global customers and
collecting money.
so if there
Would
would
be an entity that would act on their behalf. And for the purpose, for their purposes, would it be considered as an overseas jurisdiction? If so, if a European entity is doing business with the GIFT City entity, will it be considered as a European entity or so that?
yeah. So this is territorially within India, right? So you cannot create a GIFT IFSC entity and say this is European entity or American entity.
Okay.
It is still an Indian entity only, but it is in the foreign jurisdiction.
Okay.
Correct? Because, see, even though it's like a country within a country concept, we don't have our own central bank here. We are a unified regulator, but if you look at it, you take the China-Hong Kong story. Hong Kong is the international part of China. So like that, you can say GIFT IFSC is the international part of India. But the difference there is they had two different central banks and two different currencies. So they were able to do that. We don't do that. Even though we have the powers of RBI, we are not the central bank. On the currency part, we won't involve. It is RBI who is the central bank of the country. Okay. Second part is this is territorially within India. So a lot of income tax laws apply here. Now, how do I give a 0 or 100% corporate tax exemption? It's a carve-out which has happened, specific for the jurisdiction. You're getting that.
Got it.
So territorially, we are still in India. We don't have our own standing army to protect it, right? It's still part of India.
Right.
But there are some carve-outs given from a tax laws, and it's a separate jurisdiction with a separate regulator, which means there are a lot of other flexibilities which come, especially on this cross-border. So if you are a company dealing with a lot of countries collecting the fund, instead of setting up base in a Dubai or a Singapore, setting up and GIFT IFSC is the most cost-efficient option for you, considering the cost of real estate, cost of talent, the kind of regulations you have. You can drive down to GIFT IFSC from Dubai or take a flight, domestic flight, and be done with it.
Thank you for that, and thank you for highlighting the effort that we are putting. We have to share with the rest of the audience that we did begin an application with Monetary Authority of Singapore. And there are other requirements, which is you need to have a local resident as well, you need to employ them, similar restrictions. And when we looked at the cost of setting up an entity there, we realized that maybe we should postpone it by a year or so as our revenues caught up with it. And it was in that context when we thought, okay, we should possibly give up on this business and not even contemplate it when this happened. Very refreshing and a whiff of fresh air. And to be honest with, I don't think there is this notion that everybody wants to do a workaround. I just want to state that. I don't think, given a chance, I think 98% of us, 99% of us want to work within the system. Today, there are a lot of players. I think for whatever all motivations, it's different. But we personally see the GIFT City and the IFSC as an opportunity where we possibly don't have all of those impositions. And it is literally a gold rush, if you will. I think in the next 3-4 years, there's a lot of opportunity to create frameworks, institutions. I was listening to Mr. Srinivas Injeti talk about how out of 800 alternate investment funds that are based in Mauritius, 300 are completely dedicated and exclusively focused on India. So there's an opportunity to bring all of them. So we are looking at working on some of those. Thank you.
That's really brilliant. With that, unless if anyone has questions, we are still going to be around for at least the next 10-15 minutes. So we can, but I'd like to bring the session formally to a close. I think when Mr. Joshi had come here a few weeks back, I had the privilege of listening to him, talking to him, and I realized that we need to make this almost a very regular feature, given that between Mumbai and Bangalore, 42% of the fintechs are there, and Bangalore obviously has more tech fins which are there. And so it has to become part of our narrative to say, hey, here is a startup regulator who will listen to you and may be able to help us on this journey. And you have actually a very good example of someone who's benefited from the dialogue. And so I think can't get better than that. I think, Ravi and I were discussing, and Sitwa as well, Sitava, sorry, what we will be doing, and those of you who are fintechs, we will be doing a couple of workshops to kind of gather what are some of the things that we can take back to the regulator. We'll have very focused sessions. We'll send the information out. It may be a small group meeting. And then post that, bring in the regulators, have or prepare a document which we can take to the regulators for discussion, because it'll be then very focused, action oriented, and it'll be, we'll hope to drive outcome or at least drive the thought leadership conversation around that. So watch out for that. Send us the comments. So on behalf of Thai FinTech Special Interest Group, but of course, we've also had this long-term partnership with KDM, who have the partnership with IFSCA. So that makes us, a very powerful working group who can be the voice of some of these requirements. So reach out to us. We may not always be able to help in all situations, but we hope we can be there for you to the extent that we can. So reach out. And Mr. Joshi, seriously, thank you very much. I know it's a short time that people were able to spend, but what we've always found is, for example, today we had 141 registrations. What you see in the room are just a fairly small number, but you also had about 34 people or 35 people who joined on the call, but you also have a fair number who joined by YouTube. So there's always that. And what we will be doing is kind of calling it out in the follow-up notes, which we will put onto LinkedIn, saying here is the video link if you want to listen to it. And we'll also put down some names so that you can reach out to them, because the idea is to make this your forum for taking the topics and issues forward. And regulations, I come from a banking background. I also come from an information background, Thomson Reuters, Deutsche. And for me, I think we have to work with the regulators. Their job is to protect jurisdictions, the larger economies, and I think it has been touched on. I firmly believe that, and for me, I think more knowledge exchange that happens, the greater the chance of success. We are in a very, very good place for that. If any of you want to say a few last words to wrap up, that's fine. Otherwise, after that, we'll close this call.
No, thank you very much, Satya. I think, this was an off chance post breakfast chat that we had. I said we should go and start to do some of these deep dives and it's been fantastic to have you here, right? Simply because I think, while we have had a lot of generic discussions, it's time to start going deeper because I think, as I said, this is a huge opportunity for startups that are coming up here. If you thought about the disruption, I think this is real disruption that is going to happen. And I'm glad to be part of it in any way and since informed that that will do that. As Sandhya said, we'll try and do a few more of this. We'll try and get a few other people involved so that we widen the net as we go. Right. And it doesn't need to be just the piece that we talked about. I believe there's a whole lot of activity that's going to happen on, let's say, supply chain, on cross-border businesses. So we need to start working for this on carbon, we just plain listing and doing the aggregation and different partners that we have. So thank you very much, Sandhya. I think you've taken the lead, and I'd like to thank Kaden. You guys are always here and available, so thank you very much.
Of course, thanks for inviting me to this, and great to meet you. And awesome to kind of exchange thoughts. I think financial service regulation world over are evolving very fast. In light of decentralization, in light of just the general borderlessness of things that we are experiencing, and to have a dialogue on cross border is very, very relevant and very contemporary at this point in time. And I think a lot of this. More of this, I think, is what will ultimately drive it, because, like you're saying, there are firms which are looking to actually build, innovative solutions in this space, and without engaging actively with regulation, it will not be possible. And in that light, I think to have the regulator listen to us, I think is a privilege. And so, thank you again, Sanjay.
Three things. One. Probably I should have covered it very earlier. The idea is not to take fintechs or startups from here and shift to give that. That's not what we want to do. Right. So I wanted to get that right. We will already be here and end up opening a branch or subsidiary in IFSC and still get all the benefits. The Indian arm, the Indian business can be taken care by the Indian arm here, and your international business can be taken care by. So that's how you should structure. Because the market is like this. The IFSC itself is a market. About 400 plus institutions are there. The JP Morgan, the MUFGs, the banks, the exchanges, more than 400 plus entities. That itself is a good market. Then, for foreign fintechs coming to land in India, because they can bring in dollars and explore India from there. So it's a landing pad for foreign. Similarly, it's a launch pad for our Indian. From Bangalore, you want to go conquer the world, probably instead of going to Dubai, Singapore, like the way he said. Getting an IFSC, you can still do all these things. So that's one. Second thing is, we are also building regulator to regulate the fintech bridges. Coincidentally, this morning, I got an email from my MAS counterpart saying that, hey, there is this fintech who's interested to come to India. Can you handle them? The reason he could send an email to me was we have a fintech cooperation agreement between IFSCA and MAS, right? So the question is, I want to know as part of your feedback sessions when you do it, which are those jurisdictions you want us to establish this regulatory connect so that my Indian fintechs find it easy to go to foreign markets. Because if I get a fintech from here who wants to access Singapore market, all I need to do is send an email to my counterpart there, like the way he sent this morning, saying that, hey, this is a fintech from India, I want you to handle. Because already I have a fintech regulatory bridge, which means there is a regulatory referral possible between these two jurisdictions, right? So probably we are working on some other 5-6 jurisdictions where they are building these bridges. But I would want to hear from the industry, from the innovators, what could be those decisions made? Because we are working with regulators across. I go to Israel, I talk to Bank of Israel, I go to, I mean, US regulators were all in GIFT IFSC. For the change, I had Fed Reserve, I mean, I'm not naming all of those guys, they were all on the WebEx, sitting in their night time, listening to the conversation because the fintech,
Well,
regulatory
it's-
dialogue is happening in GIFT IFSC. MOF was there, RBI was there, all of us are there because it's a financial regulatory dialogue, right? So what I'm trying to say is, this is a time our fintechs need to go and conquer the world. In that discussions there, everybody was stunned by our payment rates. They know we are the superpower there. That's it, period. The US knows it. UPI, the way we are going, ONDC, account aggregator, we are just trailblazing that area. But there are more areas, right? And as a regulator, as an international jurisdiction looking regulator, I want to build that fintech bridges with other areas where our fintechs want to go. So that's point number two. Third, thank you so much for having me here. It was a true pleasure and a privilege. Thank you, Sami, again for making me.
So thank you. So we're wrapping up the call. So anyone on the bridge, please, you can leave.